Namo Mirabutsu. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night, whatever time of the day it is, whatever mind states you're in, whatever conditions you're in, whatever realms you're in, you're very welcome to my channel. It's very late at night. That's why I'm speaking in low tones and using the headphones, because I don't want to wake anyone in the house. Welcome again to my channel. Welcome, all are welcome. Welcome to Jodo Shinshu. Welcome to the Dharma of Amida Buddha. Welcome to the ocean of the vow. Please immerse yourself. So, yeah, tonight going to be continuing with my readings of the introduction to Confucius or Confucianism, introduction to Confucianism. I'm going to share my screen now. So I'm going to continue my readings of An Introduction to Confucianism by Xinzhong Yao of the University of Wales, Lampeter, and this is published by Cambridge University Press. I am not affiliated at all with either the author or the Cambridge University Press, nor am I promoting either. I am just using, and this is not for profit, so I'm just using this as fair use for educational purposes. So in my readings of this, and this, as far as I know, is made available to the public, so in PDF form. So there's all the copyright information on the screen there. So if anybody wants that, it's there. So yeah, and the reason I'm doing this is as kind of laying the groundwork for for further discussions with Kyokan in my Bamboo in Daily Life series about the principles that both Shinran and Renyo refer to for us to live by in lieu of the absence of precepts in the age of Mappo. And so that's why I'm reading this, because these principles were in the culture at the time, and it's what in his wisdom Shinran Shonin pointed us toward for some guidelines for conduct, since based on the capacity of beings, the time, in keeping with times and with beings, his teaching, the Buddha Dharma teaching at that time, and in our time, has to be in accord with times and with beings and the capacity of beings and the lack thereof. And so there's no precepts in the age of Mappo, because beings cannot follow them. Just can't. We can't really grasp what they're about. We can't really properly follow them, and even if we did try to follow them, it would be poisoned. So instead, Renyo, along with other guidelines that were given by Honen and Shinran and Renyo, Shinran and Renyo point us toward these five principles. Not that they were teaching Confucianism, not that they were, but these are essentially what they were pointing us toward to follow. So that's why I'm doing this, to set up further discussion. Kyokan and I did have one discussion, as I've mentioned, about the principles of humanity, or principles of benevolence, principles of humaneness. But I think we might kind of restart it maybe and do a full discussion of the five together in a series, or we might just start with the next one, after humaneness of do the other four principles, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, so yeah, so we're just continuing with this reading. Just need to get down here to page 26 for the next section. And yes, here we go. Confucianism as a family. Oops. Confucianism as a family. It was said that Confucius had 3,000 students, among whom 72 were intimate disciples. The number of his disciples varying in different books. For example, 70 in Mengzi, 77 in Shiji, 76 in Gongzi, Jiayu, and 72 in Hao Hanshu. And the number of 72 belonging widely, and the number 72 becoming widely accepted, probably under the influence of the 5 elements school's numerological configuration of the perfect number 360 divided by 5. Interesting. After 3 years mourning, in one case 6 years, for their master, these disciples and students went to different areas, either engaging in after 3 years of mourning for their master, these disciples and students went to different areas, either engaging in administration of a state or setting up schools to teach the principles of the Ru tradition. Confucius was recognized as a symbol of the Ru, and the Ru gradually became a specific term for those who followed Confucius to interpret and teach the classics, who engaged themselves in administration, education. I don't know what's going on here with my computer tonight, but it's, sorry, let's start that sentence again. Do apologize. Confucius was recognized as the symbol of the Ru, and the Ru gradually became a specific term for those who followed Confucius to interpret and teach the classics, and who engaged themselves in administration, education, and the preservation of ancient rituals and music. The multidimensional themes raised in Confucius' conversations and the rich resources of his teaching made it possible for the members of the Ru to develop different understandings and interpretations of Confucius and his philosophy. The differences in the methods of learning and practice led to a variety of sections within the broad category of Ru. According to Han Fei, during this period, there were 8 prominent sections of the Ru. Although these sections developed Confucian doctrines in manifestly different directions, all of them considered themselves faithful followers of Confucius, devoted to studying, editing, and interpreting the classics, as well as producing a considerable amount of new literature in the Ru tradition, and thus receiving recognition as distinguished scholars, Ru, on the ancient classics. All these sections together were known as Ru Jai, one of the Bai Jai, 100 schools. Jai means a structure of family home, being extended to refer to a group of people who are developed to the same ideal and who form among themselves relationships which are like those of a large family. By Ru Jai, it is meant the school or tradition of the literati, or scholars who have committed themselves to the tradition of the Ru. As a school, Ru Jai sought to make the way of ancient sage kings prevail again in the present world. The way, and when they're saying the way, it's always capitalized. The way of the ancient, or the Tao, that's what that's saying, really. The Tao of the ancients. So the way of the ancients was understood as multi-dimensional in its contents, including the vision of harmony, the rules of propriety, the values of rituals and rites, virtues and methods of benevolent government. All these were believed to have been well illustrated in the classics that Ru scholars held Confucius to have edited and interpreted. Ru Jai propagated the study and learning of these classics in order to Ru Jai propagated the study and learning of these classics to correct disorder and to transform society, and strove to bring order to the state and peace to the world. Like many other schools, the Ru transmitted these teachings and principles through forging a seemingly unbroken chain of master disciples. Its practices were characterized by untiring study of and instruction on ancient writings, and by performing rituals and playing music properly under the guidance of masters. It's all quite beautiful, actually. So Confucianism as a cult, Jiao. For a long time after the death of Confucius, Confucianism remained only one of many schools. Although its teaching was considered prominent and its followers were numerous, it did not enjoy any privilege throughout the Warring States period. On the contrary, it was frequently mocked and attacked by the followers of other schools, as it had been during the lifetime of Confucius. In the eyes of its rivals, Confucianism did not provide adequate answers to the problems of life, nor did it show any advantage over other schools. In the passage from a Taoist work, the Book of Zhuangzi, Confucianism is treated the same as other schools, having its strong and weak points. The various skills of the 100 schools by Jai have their strong points, and at times each may be of use, but none is wholly sufficient. None is universal. That was a quote from, well, it's saying Watson. I don't know if that was a quote of Zhuangzi or if that was a quote of the author Watson in 1964. Anyway, and I'll just stop here and say really quickly, especially with the more sort of traditional Taoist, not traditional, the other Taoist thinkers, the what would you say, the philosophical Taoism kind of thinkers, the more naturalist schools, I would say, of Taoism, like kind of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi and teachings like that, Tao Te Ching. Those Taoist schools would there was this dance between those sort of other Taoist schools and the Confucian schools, because they're both, like I said in my other previous video, they're both Taoic. There was lots of Taoic traditions, actually, lots of them, and so they use kind of similar principles, but in different ways from different angles, and with kind of different views. But between Confucianism and this kind of naturalistic Taoism, I'll call it, there was kind of this dance between them. They were a foil for each other in a lot of ways. One sort of pointing out the weaknesses of the other, and they um, what's his name? Alan Watts kind of refers to this dance between them. That was kind of, and I kind of think of it almost like the yin yang. That was kind of the Confucianists and the naturalist Taoists were kind of like yin yang, like the yin yang kind of dancing around each other. But anyway, just a little point there. So while I was discussing kind of similar such things. All right. So the first emperor of the Qin dynasty. Sorry. Oh yeah, that is where we are. Okay, the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, 221 to 206 BCE, relied on legalism, fa jai, to unify the government, to unify and govern the empire, as legalism was one of the chief rivals of Confucianism. Confucianism was humiliated and suffered from suppression and persecution. With the gradual recovery in the first few decades of the former Han dynasty, 206 BCE to 8 CE, Confucianism became a dominant school and an orthodox ideology during the reign of Emperor Wu from about 141 to 887 BCE. Closely related to the religious sacrifices of the state, Confucianism was given another name, Jiao, and later became one of the three Jiaos: Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. In Shiji, or the records of the historian Ru, and Jiao first linked together. In Shi'i, or the records of the historian Ru, and so there's, I see what that's saying. So let me start that sentence again. In Shiji, or the records of the historian, Ru and Jiao were first linked together. However, the meaning here is perhaps no more than the teaching of the Ru. One of the early references to Confucianism as a religious doctrine is made in the history of the Jin dynasty. When Kang Yu Wei, when Kang Yu Wei of the late Qing dynasty or Qing dynasty, when Kang Yu Wei of the late Qing dynasty, 1644 to 1911, launched a reform movement to transform Confucian tradition into a state religion, he confected the story that Confucius created Ru Jiao, the religion or religious doctrine of the literati. And it's interesting, how that was made, made into, the perception was given that it was a religion and that it was founded by Confucius for this agenda. It's kind of interesting, but anyway, and not surprising. The original form of Jiao is a pictograph consisting of a hand holding a stick and beating a child. Later, the later form of the character consists of teaching, educating, and filial piety, meaning that a child is rigorously brought into filial relation. This meaning was broadened to include the doctrines that a group of people endeavored to transmit and spread. A Jiao also implies a system of observance of rituals, disciplines of behavior and faith in teachings of the founders of a tradition, which are regarded as three of the most important factors in maintaining the unity and transmission of a Jiao. Therefore, it is meant by Ru Jiao. Therefore, what is meant by Ru Jiao is the cult of the learned or cultured, the continuous tradition of the scholars who followed Confucius to take part in the interpretation and application of the doctrines explored in the classics, and who emphasized the importance and significance of rituals and ceremonies for the realization of their ideal. As Confucianism was promoted to the state of as Confucianism was promoted to the state ideology, the reverence and worship of Confucius became part of state religious activities. Confucius was given the title of perfect sage and ancient teacher. Religious ceremonies were performed on his birthday and other festivals, and sacrifices were offered to his spiritual tablet in temples dedicated to Confucius. Along with the rising of Confucius' status and with the dogmatic application of his teachings, two more names were invented to refer to Confucianism. Jiao, the cult of Confucius, emphasizes that the teaching and figure of Confucius are central to the tradition and recognizes that Confucianism as a distinctive school, a glorious tradition, and an orthodox doctrine was promoted, explored, transmitted, and interpreted by Confucius, while Li Jiao reveals the overemphasis of Confucianism on Li and the rules of propriety, the rites, rituals, and ceremonies. So very interesting, all the ways that it was used later on and was portrayed for various purposes and agendas. And I don't think that Confucius taught anywhere that he was to be kind of revered in that way, and I don't think at all he wanted to be made as that kind of a figure. So anyway, very interesting. So Confucianism as a form of learning. One of the features that serves to distinguish Confucianism from many other traditions is its commitment to the study and transmission of ancient classics. Confucius is said to be the great editor and commentator of the classics, and his reputation as the sage is based on the fact that he embodies ancient culture. Following him, each generation of Confucian masters and scholars made a contribution to learning, and the doctrines of Confucianism were gradually enriched and extended to numerous writings, treatises, and discussions. The Confucian tradition has gathered around its classics an unparalleled abundance of annotations and commentaries. As the tradition of literati, Confucianism is steeped in the spirit of scholarship. Confucianism is thus known by the name Ru Zhu, or Ru Zhui, not sure of the pronunciation there, meaning the learning of scholars, and the term is used in the records of history. It is agreed that Confucianism has been able to outlive its status as state religion and has survived persecution, suppression, and revolution because it is sustained not by its social and religious privilege, but by its unflagging efforts to further learning. It is also contended that Confucian temples may be demolished, devotion to its sages abolished, and Confucian followers may be stripped of their social privileges. But Confucianism can still survive and thrive as long as learning is permitted and the classic texts are available. For this reason, most modern East Asian intellectuals prefer the name Confucianism as Ru Zhui rather than Ru Jai or Ru Jiao, in recognition of the fact that the life and spirit of Confucianism lies in its learning. I think the part of it, I personally think, look at it as this part of its survival. That's true, but part of its survival is just it because it was such an effective memeplex, as I mentioned earlier. That could be the social scientist in me. That was my educational background, but there's a real it's a very effective uh, and memeplex that has survived. And I think that's also because it's based on virtue. That's the other reason I think that it gives it strength, it gives it integrity, is because it's based it's based on truth and virtue and 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 you know goodness and benevolence and humaneness and all these things that I think that gives it, that is another reason it's survived. Anyway, it is generally recognized that either as a school of thought or as state orthodoxy, the vitality of Confucianism can be generated through learning and education and renewed in its practicing what has been learned. Confucian learning differs significantly from what we mean today by learning. Yeah, exactly. I was thinking is that same exact thing, that it's more, should be more like cultivation. It's more cultivation. It's for more like inculcating these things into oneself and into one's family and into one's society and into governance. Anyway, come back here. So where was I? I'll just start again. It is generally recognized that either as a school of thought or as a state orthodoxy, the vitality of Confucianism can be generated through learning and education and renewed in its practicing and renewed in practicing what has been learned. Confucian learning differs, that's Confucian learning with a capital C, capital L, differs significantly from what we mean today by learning. Lowercase learning. For a Confucian, capital learning, capital L learning, for a Confucian, learning is first of all a process of reading, understanding, and deliberating, but it is more than purely academic. It is more than a purely academic subject. Confucian learning is the study of the way of heaven, both in the inner self and the external practices. The only purpose of learning is the promotion of virtuous action. Oh, there we go. So it's just saying the only purpose of learning is the promotion of virtuous action and the cultivation of moral character, as Confucian made it clear that a person of virtue studies the way, capital W, the way in order to love people, unquote. Confucian learning is also closely related to human nature and destiny. Learning is to transform oneself and retain what is virtuous. It is in this sense that Mengzi, the second sage of the Confucian tradition, understood the way of learning to be nothing other than going after the lost heart. So it's not just learning of the mind, it's learning in the heart, it's learning, it's aesthetic, it's a sensibility, it's character, you're learning character, you're refining your character. It's much more than just head learning. And obviously aesthetic, and it's art and it's culture and it's, obviously with the music, that's really interesting, the use of music in the process and the importance of music to all of that. Anyway, I digress and now come back. As a particular kind of learning, oh yeah, then I just wanted to say too, it is in this sense that Mengzi, the second sage of the Confucian tradition, understood the way of learning to be nothing other than going after the lost heart. I love that, the lost heart, so it's going after something that's already there. It's trying to bring out what's already naturally there, in some way. Another little, I'd say, interesting parallel. I'm not trying to draw an exact parallel there, but kind of rings of bit of nature, a bit. Again, coming back to that, you know, um, teaching that people like Confucius may have been Buddhas or Bodhisattvas in disguise. So anyway, again, not drawing an exact parallel or anything there, but just kind of pointing out it's interesting. And I guess, in the Taoist sense, in the Tao, the sort of naturalist Taoist, everything returns to the Tao, returns to the way. So it's a similar kind of principle, going after the lost heart, returning to what's already there, returning to the natural state. Anyway, moving on. As a particular kind of learning, the Confucian tradition is known for three characteristics. One, that its members are mostly learned people or civilized intellectuals in a broad sense, which reveals that in Confucian learning, preference is always given to the virtuous way of life. Yep. Two, that they commit themselves to expanding upon and interpreting the classics, which indicate that the value of Confucianism lies in a continuous process of transmitting and furthering the ancient tradition. And three, that they endeavor to carry out politically and ethically, collectively and individually, the principles embodied in the classics, which implies that the intention and goal of Confucian learning is to transform the world in the world. Interesting. Okay, ethics, politics, and religion in Confucian tradition. The seven-dimension theory of religion put forward by Ninian Smart has become a useful tool for scholars in religious studies to explore the richness and depth of a particular tradition. Smart believes that although it is difficult to define a religion, we can examine it usefully in different aspects or dimensions, such as the practical and ritual dimension, the experiential and emotional dimension, the narrative and or mystic dimension, the doctrinal or political dimension, the ethical or legal dimension, the social and institutional dimension, and the material dimension. That's from Smart, 1989. Confucianism literally means the tradition and doctrine of literati/scholars. In fact, it is more than the values of a group of people. It contains a socio-political program, an ethical system, and a religious tradition. It functions as an underlying ideology and a guiding principle permeating the way of life in China and in informing the cultures of many other East Asian countries. Let me just read that last time. I'm not sure I read that right or got the intonations right or missed the word in there or something. Let me just read that last sentence again. It functions as an underlying ideology and a guiding principle permeating the way of life in China and informing the cultures of many East Asian cultures. Oh, I see. It's just kind of a follow on from the previous sentence. So that's an important, really important paragraph. I'm just going to start that paragraph again. So kind of starting from here. So Confucianism literally means the tradition and doctrine of the literati/scholars. In fact, it is more than the value of a group of people. It contains a socio-political program, an ethical system, and a religious tradition. Its functions it functions as an underlying ideology and a guiding principle permeating the way of life in China and informing the cultures of many other East Asian cultures. So as I was saying, I've said that repeatedly while I've been talking, while I've done the other two the previous two videos while I've been reading this paper, making reference to that that it's like the fabric of East Asian cultures. It's just survived as the very fabric of their cultures. Obviously, other influences and other things, but it's a pretty major influence in East Asian cultures all over the world. And a good one, as I say. So, okay, Confucian doctrines are primarily explored and illustrated in the Confucian classics and are also enriched, transformed, and extended at the hands of many generations of Confucian masters and students. The interpretation of Confucian principles changes with the times, and we can therefore observe a number of distinct phases or stages in the process of Confucian evolution. Confucianism was the dominant school of thought and orthodox ideology for the most part of 2000 years, exercising both dogmatic and dynamic functions. It was dogmatic in maintaining and strengthening its dominance, but it was also flexible enough to adapt to different environments and situations, shaping and reshaping itself constantly and synthesizing new ideas from other schools. There's the Taoic part of it. Anyway, it is essentially a Chinese tradition, primarily reflecting referring to the flexibility as the Taoic part of it. Another Taoic aspect of it is the flexibility of it to absorb and evolve and adapt to other things. It is essentially a Chinese tradition, primarily reflecting the Chinese attitude toward life and the world, although of course it has spread also to other East Asian nations, flourishing in both a distinctively Korean and Japanese form. So again, as I was saying, at various times throughout these videos, and I think it's also very it's only mentioned Korea and Japan there, but I think it's also in other cultures like Vietnam. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's a pretty major component of their culture, and other East Asian cultures. But okay, any adequate understanding of Confucianism, past and present, will depend upon a thorough examination of all its dimensions, phases, and forms, as well as the interplay between it and its social environment. Each of these dimensions is in itself a miniature of the whole tradition, embodying the fundamental principles of Confucianism and at the same time reflecting other dimensions in its own distinctive way. Can we single out from the many dimensions the one which is the more important than the others, and by which Confucianism may be defined? Many modern scholars and students of Confucian studies have attempted to answer this question, yet Confucianism demonstrates an ability to cross the boundaries of the traditionally defined subjects in the West. Therefore, the variety of its presentations has made it almost impossible to be clearly defined. Even so, some of them still argued that Confucianism must have some essential characteristics that serve to set it apart from other traditions and to preserve its distinctiveness, and that it should be possible to define Confucianism in its relation to either its ethics, politics, or religion. An ethical system. Morality has been characteristic of Confucian theory and practice. It was on the foundation of Confucianism that various codes of moral life, rules of propriety, patterns of behavior, and guidelines for social and daily life were produced and enhanced. Confucianism underlined, and perhaps to a smaller extent continues to underline, the basic structure of society and community, to orient the life of the people and to define their moral standards and ethical ideal in most parts of East Asia, as I've been saying all along. Considering the central position of morality in Confucianism and the significance of Confucian ethics for society, some Western scholars have concluded that the moral dimension is also essential for Confucianism, and that Confucianism itself can be defined as forms of ethics. The number of prominent scholars hold this position, or a number of prominent scholars hold this position. For them, quote, Confucianism was essential as a system of ethics. And that's from Needham, 1970. And then another quote, what is called in the West, quote, Confucianism, unquote, is the traditional view of life and code of manner in the Chinese gentry, unquote. That's from Zahner, 1988. And Confucianism should be viewed only as, quote, a set of behavioral patterns, unquote. And that was from Tu et al., 1992. As a moral tradition, Confucianism demonstrates many features in common with other moral systems in the world. For example, Confucian ethics emphasizes that both inner motive and external results must be taken into account when we evaluate a person or his conduct. It's very good. It's a very good thing. It's comprehensive, and that's very wise. That's a very wise way to look at things or to understand things. In this sense, it is both deontological and consequentialistic. Confucius repeatedly taught that while it was important to observe ancient rituals strictly, it was even more important to have a sincere heart and devoted spirit. Boom. Quote, for if a person lacks humaneness, Ren or Zhen, within, then what is the value of performing rituals? Or if a person lacks humaneness within, what is the use of performing music? Unquote. And I believe that's quoting Confucius by Lun Yu. Anyway, but Confucius, I'm never sure I'm getting that right. So I think that was a quote from Confucius, but nevertheless, moving on. Confucius took a holistic view of a person and believed that if we looked at how a person acted, examined his motives and his tastes, then it would be impossible for the person to conceal his real character from us. Very wise. Confucian morality revolves around family relationships, especially, I say very wise, but you have to be very perceptive to be able to see those things. You have to be very wise to be able to see that happening, or that to be able to perceive those things. Anyway, Confucian morality revolves around family relationships, especially around the relationships between parents and children, between elder and younger brothers, between husband and wife. In these relationships, The primary emphasis is put on fulfilling responsibilities to each other with a sincere and conscientious heart. However, Confucian ethics is not confined to the family. It takes family virtues as the cornerstone of social order and world peace. Its logic is that the family is the basic unit of human community and that harmonious family relationships will inevitably lead to a harmonious society and a peaceful state. Quote, if only everyone loved his parents and treated his elders with deference, the empire would be at peace, unquote. Love that. For those who are members of the ruling class, their virtues in family affairs are even more significant for the whole country. Quote, when a ruler feels profound affection for his parents, the common people will naturally become humane, unquote. Kind of harkens of, the behavior of a Chakravartin, of whatever level of Chakravartin that is, of the temporal, ruler in Buddhism, the teachings about the Chakravartin and how they are, and what their characteristics are and things. And also it harkens of the 10 principles of kingship that Shakyamuni taught. Anyway, in light of such points, some modern philosophers believe that the way by which the Confucian moral system was established is similar to that of virtue ethics. Moral instruction and ethical persuasion employed by Confucius and Mengzi are even said to be able to provide, quote, to quote, provide a radical alternative to the Aristotelian and Thomistic paradigms most often involved, unquote, in the West. And that's from Nivison, 1996. As a system of virtue ethics, Confucianism is said to point to a solution for social problems arising from the lack of virtues and from the lack of will to practice virtues. With respect to the lack of virtues, the Confucian solution is a sort of persuasion enforced by rules of ritual/propriety, while for so-called, quote, weakness of will, unquote, it follows that the path of self-cultivation, and education. So let me read that last sentence again. With respect to the lack of virtues, the Confucian solution is a sort of persuasion enforced by rules and ritual/propriety, while for so-called weakness of will, it follows the path of self-cultivation and education. Very interesting. It's such a very comprehensive and I'd say very wise system and philosophy. It's amazing, if in my in my very, very extremely humble and unlearned opinion. Even if we agree with all these arguments, the question still remains, are these arguments enough for Confucianism to be defined as a system of ethics? There is no question that Confucianism is oriented toward morality and that ethics is the central part of its theory and practice. But what is meant by morality in Confucianism is in fact quite different from that defined in Western ethics. I think this is really important for the later discussions I'm going to have with Kyokan. In this respect, Henri Maspero's comments are to the point. So quoting Henri Maspero, quote, the central problem of the doctrine of literati in all ages was one of ethics, and that is probably what has also often led to the judgment that Confucianism was above all a morality, which is far from accurate. ... It is indeed a matter of very particular ethics, quite different from what we generally understand by this word, and that is probably why it is so often omitted from Western accounts of Confucianism. In reality, the problem is the effect which the good or bad acts of man, and especially the government acts of the sovereign representing humanity, have upon the orderly progress of natural phenomena, the progress of stars, ellipses, earthquakes, floods, etc., and upon human affairs, the deaths of sovereigns, revolts, overthrows of dynasties, etc. That's from Maspero, 1981. I'm just going to read that last bit again without the parentheses. So it just is more flowing. So in reality, the problem is the effect which the in reality, the problem is the effect which the good or bad acts of man have upon the orderly progress of natural phenomena and upon human affairs. So again, coming back to those, you know, the thought that, you know, perhaps Confucius was a Buddha or Bodhisattva in disguise, there's the three sort of aspects. There's teachings in various schools of Buddhism about the like three aspects of, I guess you'd call it, reality within samsara, and that and kind of the idea of all the 10 worlds being within all of us, and each of the 10 worlds being within each of the 10 worlds, etc. And it comes down, and all of that from the individual emanates through those three aspects of I guess you'd call the reality or dream state of samsara into those three areas, and it kind of echoes those three areas there. But so it's kind of interesting. But anyway, but coming back to the paper, indeed, Confucian ethics are not only about what we mean by moral issues, but also about politics, religion, education, psychology, and metaphysics. All these aspects are integral to Confucian ethics. As morality is integrated with religion and politics, moral virtues become essential both for governing and for religious activities. As religion and metaphysics are part of morality, religious ritual and practice are a way of moral improvement. Taking these into account, we have to say that since Confucianism contains a very special kind of morality, and since Confucian ethics covers a much wider area than in the West, it would be misleading to simply define Confucianism as a moral system. I wholeheartedly agree. An official orthodoxy. As the tradition of literati, Confucianism is characterized by its deep involvement in politics, aspired to by its ambition to bring order and peace to the world. After Confucianism gained prominence over all other schools, Confucian ethics gradually became a universal yardstick for behavior and ideas, and orthodoxy that oriented conduct, thought, and relationship. The moral and political requirements of Confucianism were crystallized as the 3 guiding principles, Sangang, and the 5 constant regulations, Wu Chang, on which Confucian states were established. Among the 3 principles maintained and propagated by Confucianism, the first and foremost is the subordination of a subject or minister to his ruler, which is followed by that of a son to his father and of a wife to her husband. The 5 regulations are actually 5 Confucian virtues: humaneness, Ren or Zhen, righteousness, Yi, ritual/propriety, Li, wisdom, Ji, and faithfulness, Zin, which are believed to be as constant and unchanging as natural laws, remaining the same for all time and guiding/ordering all other virtues. These principles and regulations are taken as the essence of life and the bonds of society. In this way, Confucianism extended the boundaries of moral codes from individual matters to social and political areas, not only providing the state with an ideological format, but also equipping the authority with standards to judge behavior and thoughts. To emphasize the function and value of Confucianism in shaping and reshaping society and politics, some scholars argue that Confucianism was none other than an official state orthodoxy. In posing the question, quote, what was the Confucianism that concerned society at large in late imperial China? Unquote. For example, Quang Ching Li and his companions obviously have in mind the answer of, quote, an official state orthodoxy, unquote. That's from Liu 1990. Confucius was seriously concerned with political irregularities. In order to bring peace to states and to restore the brilliant way, capital W, of the ancients in his time. Let me read that again. Confucius was seriously concerned with political irregularities. In order to bring peace to states and to restore the brilliant way of the ancients in his time, he paid great attention to the rules of propriety. One of his concerns was about the discrepancy between names and reality, between language and action, between rights and duties. And so we have a quote here. If names be not correct, Zheng, language would not be fluently used. If language be not fluently used, affairs could not be carried on to success. Ritual/propriety Li and music could not be flourishing. The punishments could not be properly made. Then the people would not know how to behave. I think that's a quote from Confucius, but it's from Lun Yu, is the reference. What Confucius tried to argue here is that if a ruler, a subject, a father, and a son do not fulfill their duties, they abuse their titles and violate the names by which they are defined. For Confucius, this is the beginning of the collapse of ritual/propriety and music. It is one of the causes which brings about social disorder and political chaos. Quite another way to say the way that the day the music died comes to mind. The day the music died, indeed, and the cause of the music dying. Anyway, having given preeminence to the role of a ruler in restoring the way of the ancients, Confucius seldom emphasized the one-way loyalty of the subject or his minister to the ruler. Rather, he insisted that the relationship must be reciprocal. Quote, the ruler should employ his subject ministers according to the rule of propriety/ritual, Li, while subject ministers should serve their ruler with loyalty, Zhong. Again, quote of Confucius, but in Lunyu. However, to serve the purpose of imperial government, this theory of rectification of names was, especially in the latter part of history, extended and interpreted as a conservative bulwark for an authoritarian regime in which absolute subordination of subject minister to ruler guaranteed an effective administration. In this way, In this way, Confucianism became more than a system of morality or a school of thought, and it was the core of the state orthodoxy that each person, every event, every affair must be in accordance with what was required from them. And that is the end of this PDF paper. So thank you for listening. It's quite a subject, but I think it's really important to cover it because just to put into context the discussion that we're going to have about the guidelines pointed to or offered by Xinzhong and Renyo for how we should conduct ourselves in this age of Mapo when there's no precepts, and yet just guidelines. Obviously part of what has to happen with us as Jodo Shinshu is, and in the process of Jinin and Shinjin, we naturally want to turn away from evil. That's part of that process. We're still Bombo, we're still possessed of blind passions, we still until the very end of life, but there does, through Amida Buddha's power, through Amida Buddha's working, there is a natural wanting to turn away from our evil and evil behavior and try to do better. We're going to fail miserably because we're Bombo, but there's a natural tendency toward that because of Amida's working, Amida's influence, Amida's mind, Amida's light, Amida's compassion, Amida's wisdom, and the Nambutsu. It does bring that does happen. But anyway, which gives, it's good that we have those guidelines though from Master Shinran and Renyo, and from Honen. Didn't talk specifically about these. There were other guidelines which I want to cover in a video as well from Honen on conduct and behavior, but we'll get to them all in turn. So thank you again for listening. I hope this has been helpful or enlightening in the learning sense with a lowercase l, or even in the capital L case. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope it has given some context for that future discussions we'll have. So thank you very much. Just say some quick Nambutsu. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu. Thank you very much, and take care until next time.